Good morning, welcome back. And today I want to talk about a very confusing and complicated drapery style, which is Ripplefold. This is snap tape, which is commonly used on a Ripplefold drapery. On these that I'm working on today, I'm going to be using the clear tape because they are going to be sheer draperies with no lining. So this will kind of disappear at the header. This is a really good example, this actual project that I'm working on, because I have 3 different rooms with 3 different work orders, and each one is a one-way draw, so that keeps it simple, but they're each a different fullness. So one is 60% fullness, one is 80% fullness, and one is 100% fullness. So I took really good notes on all of my math and how I figured out how big each tape needs to be. I have them pre-cut, and I'll go over why I pre-cut that. And the different fullnesses have some very interesting ramifications as far as your stack back and how much fabric you need and how many carriers and all that. So I'm going to go over how to read the Ripplefold chart, which you'll find online or in different hardware vendors' catalogs. This one is from Helster Brothers catalog. And so I also matched the highlighting from each of my work orders to show you how to read this chart. So that should be helpful. And also I'm going to talk about how this older chart varies from the newer chart that's out there right now, which I didn't know. As soon as this one came out, I didn't know that this was different than this one. So it's kind of a good FYI. It's not going to be wrong if you use the old chart, but it might change your numbers a little bit. So I'm going to try to zoom in on some of these details and go over what I have discovered. Here's my work orders showing the 3 different Ripplefold, stack back, fullness, rod, tape, plus side hems, fabric needed at the bottom. Okay, here we have all of the work orders for the 3 different rooms. This is bedroom 1, this is bedroom 2, and this is the living room. And each room has a different fabric, which is why we want to use different fullnesses. So this bedroom has a really beautiful fabric with a beautiful design on it, pattern. And we don't want the drape so full that you lose the pattern. So by having a 60% fullness, it will be less full, which means you'll see more of the print. And then this room has a sheer, so we wanted this one to be fuller than this one. And this room has a very thin sheer, so that needs more fullness, because the thinner the fabric is, the more fullness you want to have it be really beautiful. But you want to also consider your stack back when deciding on your fullness, and we'll show you how that gets calculated as we go. Let's just look at one at a time. So this 60% in bedroom 1 has a rod width, finished width of 128, which I have up on my work order, but it's a little bit hard to see. So 128 is our rod width, and again, it's a one-way, so we don't have to divide that in 2, which is what you would do if it was a center split, in order to look at this chart. So since it's a one-way, we just take the rod size, the 128, and the fullness. So here we go to the fullness column and then go down the chart until you find your finished width. So 128 right here, it's going to be a range. So this one is 124 to 128. And then so everything to the right and to the far left tells us the other information we need. So right here to the right, this column tells us how many inches of stack back there's going to be. So the chart says 30 3/8. And then this column shows how many carriers we need, which here is 50. I don't look at the snaps needed, and we'll explain why. But then if you go to the left over here, it shows in this column how much fabric you need, flat fabric, after it's hemmed, after your side hems are in. So this particular 128 at 60% fullness needs a fabric width of 112.5. And then if you add in your side hems, that's another 3 inches on each side. So don't forget to add in your side hems. But here's the interesting thing. This is the old chart. And if you go and look at the new chart in the new catalog, so again, we go to the 60% fullness down to the 125 to 128, since our rod is 128. The stack back is going to be 32.5 according to this chart. The old chart said 30 3/8. Snaps needed is still 50, so that didn't change. But the other thing that changed is how much fabric you need before you hem it. So here it says 222.25, and the old chart said 212.5. So that is a pretty significant difference. You might not have enough fabric if you go according to the old chart. And remember, you need to add your side hems to this. So what I have figured out after I counted my carriers on my actual rod, and I'll show you how I do that, is that I need 222.5 inches of tape, which is almost exactly what this chart says, the new chart. So this is pretty accurate. And then once you add in your side hems, so the tape plus the side hems, this is how much fabric I need to have so that after I fold in my side hems, I'll have enough fabric left for the tape. So this information was gathered from reading this chart right here. And we'll go over each one, but I want to point out a few things before I go over each one of these individually. This is interesting. The stack back from this one to this one to this one doesn't vary much. And in fact, these two are exactly the same, even though this rod is 128 and this one is 114.5. This is 13.5 inches smaller than this one, but the stack back is the same. And that's because there's more fullness, 80% rather than 60. So because there's more fullness, each of the carriers needed to get the fullness is going to add to the stack back. So if that's important, then you might want to consider going down to a 60% fullness. But if you have the room, you know, it's okay to have a fuller drape because it's traditionally more luxurious to have a fuller drape. But in this case, we wanted the 60%, again, because we want to see that beautiful pattern. And so then the other interesting thing is that this rod is the smallest rod of all three, and it has the biggest stack back of all three, which is because the fullness is 100% on that one. And so if I look at the chart, and again, I'll use the old one and show you how the new one varies. So we want 100% fullness on the pink work order, and our finish width is 109.5. So find the fullness column and then look for the 109.5, which is between 109 and 112. It says over here we need 129.5 inches of fabric, and the new chart says 239. So each one is about 10 inches difference. And then over here, it says we need 54 carriers, which is the same. 32 5/8 is the stack back on this chart. And on this one, it's 34 3/4. So the new chart is consistently showing bigger stack backs and more fabric needed. So this one is 80% fullness, and our finish width is 114.5. So go down the chart, and here we have 113 to 117. So that's our category right there. And then go over to the right to find your stack back in inches and your carrier count. And then all the way this way shows you your fabric. Is very interesting when you compare them and realize that this drapery on a smaller rod is going to need more fabric than this drapery on a bigger rod. So this is also something that might help when you have a client that is low on budget. If you stick with your 60% fullness, you won't need as much fabric as you will at 100% fullness. And by the way, there is a fourth category of fullness, which is 120%. And that is extremely full. And I hardly ever use this much fullness because it creates a very large stack back, which usually impairs the view from the window, which is the biggest reason to go smaller with your fullness. And also because there's so much fullness with 120, the drapery tends to bunch up together really tight and then starts to flow out into the room. It doesn't stay dressed really nicely. So my favorite part of the chart is the 60 and the 80, and then 100 for shears. There's another chart in the Helser Brothers catalog that shows the spacing between the carriers with the different percentages of fullness. So this helps to kind of visualize why a 60% fullness drapery needs less fabric than the 120, because the spacing between each snap is much bigger. It might not seem like the difference between 2 and 5/8, 2 and 3/8, 2 and 1/8, and 1 and 7/8 is much different. But when you consider adding that much difference between all of these carriers, it ends up adding up to quite a bit, especially on a drape that is very large, say 20 feet wide. You're going to have a much bigger stack back on a drapery that's 120% full compared to 60% full. And the reason I am spending time on this issue is because the stack back issue on some windows is so important, because people have $1 million views and beautiful backyards that they want to see their kids playing out in the pool. So if your drapery is covering half of the window or the sliding door, they're just not going to be happy with that. So this really helps to understand it yourself, and then if you want to pull this out to explain it to a client, might be a little bit overwhelming, but some people like to know that information. But so just know that it's there if you need it. And then I'm going to show you on the actual rods I have here how that looks from rod to rod. This is a Buttmaster master carrier, which I prefer this much better than the other option, which is the overlap master carrier. You only want to use an overlap really when you have a blackout drapery and it's a center split and you want them to overlap. Otherwise, you would be much better off having a carrier like this, because the snap tape will continue the really pretty S-wave as it finishes at the end right here. So here is the rod that is 128 inches long, and you can see that this is the longest of the 3 rods that I have, and this is the shortest of the 3 rods. This is the 109.5, that's 100% full, and this is the 128 inch, that's 60% full. They're both one-way left, so that means when you close them, everything draws this way. And by the way, these are upside down just so I can show you how it works. This is the top, which will be mounted up to the ceiling. So this is the position it's in when the drapery is closed. And when I open it, everything slides to the left. So whichever way your drapery goes when you're opening it, that's the side that is the return. So the return is on the left. That's why we call this a one-way left, which I shorten by calling it OWL, or owl, on my work order. One-way left, and then a one-way right is OWR. So here we can see that this rod that's 128, we can see how much that stack back is, and then compare that to the rod that is the smallest. That stack back is almost the same. It's actually 2 inches, if I line them up, 2 inches bigger than this one. And the reason this one is bigger is because it has the extra fullness. So it's 100% fullness. And so if I open this all the way, and then I open this one all the way, you're going to see the difference in the spacing. And then I'm going to go ahead and open this one also. This is the one-way right. even though I'm opening it, closing it actually to the left. It's a one-way right because it closes to the right. But now when they're all in the closed position, you can see the difference in the spacing. And this is where that chart explains how much is between each carrier. So here it shows that the 60% fullness has 2 5/8 between each carrier. So this is a carrier and this is a carrier. So that distance is 2 5/8. And then the 80% has 2 3/8. So that's the distance between the two carriers. 100% fullness has 2 1/8. So on paper, it doesn't look like it's very much, but you can see from this one to this one that it's a visual difference. Okay, so some more information about how the Ripplefold works. This is the Buttmaster carrier again, and I like to make sure that my snap tape will fit on the master carrier. So the distance between these two carriers, or these two snaps, is usually 1 inch. So, you know, the tape comes only with the snaps at 4 1/4 inch spacing. So to get the snaps to fit to the master carrier, I just take my snap tape and fold over the amount in between and then staple that once the first two are 1 inch apart. And then you don't have to do this part, but I like to have a little bit extra between this snap and this snap, because if you leave that spacing at the normal 4 1/4, it will be tighter right here than the rest of the folds once everything is installed. So you can kind of see once you line up the other snaps that the spacing right here looks similar to what it's going to be once everything is in place. And if I would have left this spacing at 4 1/4, it would be closer to the front of this carrier, and it would just interrupt the flow of the drapery. So that's something that I do that is not necessary, but it's just a little tweak. And these staples will all be removed after the drapery is finished. That just holds it in place temporarily. You'll get a bag of these with your rods, and you'll snap one onto each snap on the drapery before installation day. And it's really hard to do it without a tool or a pair of pliers. So I'm not going to do that right now, but what happens is that these will snap into the carriers, and that part's not too hard, but you definitely want to snap these onto the drapery because that's easier to connect up on the rod when it's on the wall rather than putting these in here first and then snapping that on. What you want to do before you make your drapery is count how many of these carriers are in the rod, which you can just use the chart and trust that the person that made the rod knows how to read the chart and read it correctly that day, and then put in the correct amount of carriers, which may be correct and accurate once you get the rod, but most times they are a little bit different than what you think you're going to get from the chart. So I just like to go ahead and make sure there's no mistakes. So I count all of the carriers, and then usually at the end there's one permanent carrier that's connected to the return. So by opening this little screw, you can see that part comes out. And then this one, you can actually take it out if you don't want it. And then you can put this back in, which sometimes I do take those out, but in this case, I'm going to leave it. Usually though, I count all these carriers, and you want to count this one if you're going to use it. If you're not going to use it, don't count it. And when I received this rod, I counted up all of these carriers, and there was 50 of them in this rod, which the chart, going back to the chart, This is the drapery that is 128 at 60% fullness. And the chart says that we need 50 carriers. And so that's why there was 50 carriers in the rod. But the person making the rod did not count this one, which is fine because I guess some people don't use that last one. But I'm going to use it. So I actually took this off and took one of these carriers out, and I had to loosen this set screw here. And then I cut one of these off, which is right here. And then I slid back the set screw and then slid that one back on. So now I have 49 of these carriers plus the end one equals the 50 that I need. And that's why I like to wait until I have the actual drapery rod that's going to be used on install day before I make the Ripplefold drapery. Because then I know that once I make the drapery, the amount of snaps on the drapery is going to have the same amount of carriers. And so each one will have a place to go. There won't be too many snaps and there won't be too few snaps. If you're not sure why the chart says you need 50 carriers, or you just want to make sure that you have the right amount of carriers and the right amount of snaps, oftentimes I'll make a little drawing and I'll do the 3 buttmaster carrier snaps first, which would be, this picture actually corresponds to the one-way right. So here's the 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you would draw the ripple fold and mimic how the snaps are going to land, meaning this one's going to go back, this one's going to go forward, back to the wall and forward, back, forward, and so on. And the reason I do this is because I want to make sure that that very last snap with the 2, which is right here, these 2, I want to make sure that those go back towards the wall rather than forward, because we don't want to see the end of the drape coming towards the inside of the room, because then we'll see the lining on the back. So that's why I like to draw a picture sometimes and make sure that I'm ending in the right place with the fabric returning towards the wall. And if I would have left this extra carrier in the rod, that's what would have happened. So pictures are helpful. In this case, I just drew out 10 carriers to represent an even number rather than all 50 of them. I have drawn out over 50 carriers before just to physically make sure that that would work out. And now I just make the ratio smaller and do an even amount of carriers when the chart says even, and an odd amount when the chart says odd. So then once I know how many I need, in this case, 3 for the master, that's 1, 2, 3 for the master, 1, 2, 3, and then 49 of these, and then 1, meaning this guy, and then 1 more for this guy. So basically 2 at the end, which is just those 2, 49 here, and then the 3 master carriers. So if you add them all up, that means 54 snaps. So then I count out 54 snaps from beginning to end, and then I make sure the ends are going to fit at the right space, and also that the beginnings will fit the master. And then I staple all those parts into place. So here's my 3 in the beginning, and then count all of these in the middle, it's 49, and then the 2 at the end. Totals from beginning to end is 54 snaps, and I count it 3 or 4 times to make sure you did it correctly. Then you want to pull this tape out long ways on your table and measure from end to end, which in this case is longer than my table, so I had to measure it in 2 sections. But once you have that measurement, That's the measurement right here, the 222.5. And then I know I need 6 more inches of fabric for the side hems, and then that's how much fabric I need to actually make this drapery. The order of making the drapery in my workroom involves a lot of pre-work, just to make sure that we have all of the right information. We have the rod ordered correctly with the correct amount of fullness, and the draw is correct, whether it's a left or a right. The size of the rod is correct. Fullness is what we wanted it to be because we know the stack back will work. And then once we have the rod, then we count out our snaps and our carriers and make sure they match, and make sure it's going to end up going towards the wall at the end, and then cut our tape, and then we're ready to fabricate the drapery. So that is a lot of steps to do before we even cut any fabric. But now we know how much fabric we need, so now we can cut that with certainty that everything's going to work out properly and fit on installation day.